A survey released a few weeks ago by Pew Research Institute found nearly 2/3 of Americans believe that our nation's openness to people from all over the world is essential to who we are as a country, while 62% of the majority of the nation. When you look at the answers from the same question the past couple of years, you can see the number has actually dropped a few points, where more people now feel being open could cause us to lose our identity. So why the shift? Anne recently talked to a DU professor who studies such things.
Pavielle Haines is a research associate with the Center on American Politics at the University of Denver and is joining us today about immigration. And I know you've studied racial politics, identity politics, and say there are two competing visions in the country right now. What does that mean?
Yes, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me.
Of course.
So yeah, I study public opinion about how do people think about race? How do they think about what it means to be an American? And when you dig into that a little bit, what you find is that there are these two competing visions of American identity. And the first is sort of the salad bowl or melting pot vision that probably everyone has learned about in school. And if you were to go out onto the street and ask just a few people what they think it means to be an American or what makes America great, probably that's the sort of thing they would reference. They say we're multicultural, we're diverse, and that is the source of American greatness. But when social scientists really dig into survey data, what they find is that that particular vision of American identity, people pay lip service to it very often. But when you really dig into what their attitudes are, it looks a little different. And that brings us to the second vision of American identity. And that vision is a lot more exclusionary. And it's really bound up with Christian faith, Protestant work ethic, English as a first language, and even whiteness to a certain degree. When we look at studies, we can see that people sort of implicitly associate being American with being white.
So did this just happen, or has this just been something that has always been felt?
I think it's always been felt. I mean, America has always really had sort of a love-hate relationship with the concept of immigration and diversity. Right? So on the one hand, there's this vision of us being a refuge for immigrants who are downtrodden or oppressed. But when you look at our history, a lot of immigrant groups faced hostility and discrimination. They were not well received, right? So
and still do, some would say.
Right, and still do. So I think this has been going on a long time. It's certainly nothing new. I think what I would say is that in recent years, this more exclusionary vision of American identity has come to the forefront in public discourse. And political leaders are talking about American identity in these more exclusionary terms. And I think that's sort of increased the urgency and the passions around this topic are high as a result.
And so, speaking about President Trump, has he embraced this concept, or has that always been a concept that politicians have embraced over the years?
Certainly Trump has embraced it far more than others. I mean, so what I study mainly is how presidential candidates talk about patriotism and American identity.
Okay.
And what you find is that maybe they'll mention patriotism and then follow that up with a reference to how important diversity is or how much immigrants have contributed. But they are also just as likely to mention something about patriotism, say our country is great, and then make a comment that is racialized. And in the past, those have been a little more opaque, a little more implicit. So in the 80s and 90s, when there was sort of a norm of colorblindness, it was very common for politicians to say something along the lines of, our country is great, and to keep it that way, we really need to focus on inner city violence.
Oh, so what does this say about society then today? I mean, how do we, is there a bridging that gap, or are we just living two separate societies?
I think it's challenging, and I think there's actually a lot of ambivalence in the public psyche about which of these visions do we embrace, and how do we reconcile the two. And very often what you hear people who support hardline immigration policy say is, this isn't about race, it's about cultural protectionism. We want groups who will come in and uphold the American way of life and assimilate. And I think it's actually a lot more complicated than that. And I think we're going to be wrestling with this for a while. This question of what kind of country do we want to be? What should American identity be? What should the future of our country look like? And it does seem very polarized right now.
How do you even resolve that? I mean, there really is no resolution to it, right?
Right. I mean, I will say when you look at the data, there's a big generational gap in how people think about American identity. Millennials tend to very much embrace this multicultural concept and not just pay it lip service, but to genuinely believe it. Older generations are sort of split. So I think we might see, as time goes on, a movement in that more inclusionary direction. But for right now, yes, I think we're very divided, and it's going to be hard to come to some sort of middle ground on this topic.
Wow, this is all heavy.
It is. But I think it's important to think about and grapple with, because there are so many nuances in this debate that I don't think are well attended to, that could maybe help us find some common
maybe
ground.
Understand one another a little bit and get there. Pavielle Haines, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.